So, welcome to Tara Institute. My name's Damien, and I have to say it's good to be back. So I'm a little bit rusty after 2 years of really not doing any teaching, so we'll start off fairly gently, I hope. So just to maybe talk a little bit about health and safety thing. We do have two purifiers, air purifiers here, which are supposed to remove even viruses from the air, so that might make you feel a little bit more comfortable. But the real trick is, I think, social distancing and keeping yourself safe from the dreaded COVID. Like I say, welcome back. And in a way, it's a little bit, we go back to the beginning. So if we talk about the Buddha, so the Buddha lived, quite a long time ago, and we're very fortunate to have the teachings of the Buddha having been collected and passed down, and hopefully the vast majority of his teachings were passed down, but there does seem to have been some that were lost. But in general, they have been passed down, and so the first teaching that the Buddha gave is probably the one that if we can get a bit of a grasp on that teaching, then that can help us understand all of the Buddha's teachings. So the first teaching the Buddha gave was called, we refer to it as the Four Noble Truths, or the Four Truths for a realised being. So that's the meaning of the word noble in that context. Is it's something that is true for somebody who has seen the truth. So these the Four Noble Truths. Generally we sort of approach the Four Noble Truths by saying, the first one is the truth of suffering. The second one is the truth of cause, which means that suffering has a cause. And then the third one is called the truth of cessation, which is that suffering which is caused can be totally ceased. And then the fourth truth is the truth of path, meaning that there is a pathway to eliminate suffering. So the trouble with a lot of these concepts when they're translated into English is that we have very sort of already set meanings for the terms. And the challenge for us is to try to go into the meaning of the term, and then we use the word suffering, for instance, for that meaning. So in a way, we have to understand that when you hear these terms, I've already got an understanding of what suffering means, and so I will apply that to this concept. But in this case, the concept of the truth of suffering is a little bit different to our normal meaning of the word suffering. So generally, if I say suffering, a fair bit of the context of that is external. The war in the Ukraine, poverty, famine, physical harms, the destruction of the environment, or all of these sort of things that we think of as suffering. But we sort of have an externalising of that understanding. So some people prefer to translate this term, the truth of suffering, as the truth of unsatisfactoriness, or the truth of dissatisfaction. And so if we use that term, if we think of that term, the truth of dissatisfaction, we immediately see that it's an internal suffering. It's an internal state the dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction is something that I possess. So the meaning is this sort of combination possibly of suffering, because that's all that external suffering and the internal suffering, that is the truth of suffering. But in particular, if we can get an understanding of this, the truth of dissatisfactoriness, the truth of never finding satisfaction, that's also an aspect of this truth of suffering. So, I mention it like this because, if we, our innate wish is to be happy. And I think we can examine our lives and say with confidence that everything in my life that I have done has been motivated by a wish for happiness. That, starting a job, ending a job, starting a relationship, ending a relationship, buying something, selling something, obtaining something, throwing it away. All of these different actions are all motivated by a wish for happiness. What comes and goes in our lives is all motivated by this wish for happiness. Trying to bring something close, trying to push something away, both motivated by a wish for happiness. So then we encounter this Buddhist idea that unsatisfactoriness pervades all of our experience. So despite all our efforts in holding things close and grasping and holding on to something that we believe is a cause of happiness, and then pushing away a person or a thing or a situation because we think it's a cause for unhappiness, both of these actions are unsatisfactory. So that's what the truth of suffering means, that in this worldly context that we live in, that the absurd thing is that pretty much everything is unsatisfactory, which is a terrible thought. So how does what can we do to understand that or to see that? And so I think, like here, I brought in a cushion because the cold concrete under this bit of carpet here is really unsatisfactory. But so to some degree I've dealt with that because my legs won't cramp because I've got this nice cushion separating me from the thing. But so we have some ability. We have some ability to modify our behaviour in life, and so this to me is also like the example that the great Indian saint Shantideva says. That for us the world is full of thorns and stones and prickles, rough surfaces, problems. So we can try to cover the whole world with leather. To eliminate those problems. Or merely by placing leather on the soles of our feet, we achieve the same purpose. So this is used as an I hate the terms metaphor, example, analogy, whatever it is. It's used to show us that the internal protection can overcome many of our problems, but trying to change the world is a really fruitless exercise. So a lot of Buddhist practice is aimed at that solution. We can try to cover the whole world with leather, preventing all thorns, sharp, objects, rough surfaces, trying to prevent any of them having an impact on me, or I can do a simple thing of just wearing some shoes and it accomplishes the same purpose. So the point of that is that the same applies to all of our emotions and our anger, our jealousy, our miserliness, our pride, our suspicion and resentment of others, all of these sorts of things. So I would make the assertion that any of those states of mind, like anger, jealousy, resentment, suspicion, miserliness, that they actually cause or encapsulate an experience of unsatisfactoriness for me. You know, that if I get in touch with the internal experience of any of those examples, I can see that I have an unsatisfactoriness and potentially an agitation or a disturbance. You know, my mind is not at peace, is not content, is not happy. So, in practice though, we are pretty much oblivious to our internal experience because we do not look at our internal experience. And because we don't look at it, we are not in tune with this sort of unsatisfactory sort of element and the agitation due to states of mind like anger or jealousy or hatred or excessive pride or deceitful, miserly, grasping, lustful. You know, these states of mind which we experience have this element of unsatisfactoriness. Now, unfortunately to us, as ordinary beings, we think these are the pathway to happiness. We think that anger is actually our pathway to happiness. We think that like strong, lustful, grasping mind is a pathway to happiness. And so it's important to sort of think, why is that? Why is it that, exaggerating yourself, your ego, your sort of importance, and putting somebody else down, belittling somebody else or humiliating them or treating them badly, why is it that appears to us as a good pathway to happiness? What is that process that causes us to think that belittling somebody or getting angry at somebody or abusing somebody, sniping, undermining, all those sorts of things. What is it? Why is it that we think that that's a pathway to happiness? So this is a key question to understand in Buddhism, is this aspect that I want happiness. There's no question. I want happiness, and you can say that it's an innate right for everybody to have happiness. So, what is it that goes wrong? Where do we go wrong, and what is it that goes wrong in this process? And so this is what the truth of unsatisfactoriness means: is that there is this, that no matter what we do, there is an element of unsatisfactoriness about it. And so then you come to this idea of the truth of cause. So the truth of cause is listed as karma, which means our past actions. So our past actions have a consequence. So this is a key element of Buddhism, in that there is always a relationship between cause and effect. We cannot experience something that we have not created the cause for. And whatever actions we do has a consequence, and we will experience that consequence at some point. So the cause of our experience of unsatisfactoriness is past actions, and then the second cause, which is actually the major cause, is our deluded thinking. So our deluded thinking takes many forms. But I think here primarily here we can think that the form that my deluded thinking is taking is that I have this sort of belief that getting angry, being jealous, having an exaggerated pride, I have this belief that these things serve my purpose. They serve my purpose. And my purpose is to be happy and to be free from suffering. So, from the Buddhist point of view, we're sort of living in this really deluded space where we are, the things that cause suffering we grasp onto, and then the things that actually cause happiness and contentment we push away like as though they're poison. You know, the minds of love and compassion, of contentment, of humility, of forgiveness, of gratitude, these types of minds, we push them away like they're some sort of poison. And so this is what our delusion really means for us as individuals, is that we are really messed up in a way. We've got it around back to front. So the whole point of Buddhist philosophy is for us to try to educate ourselves in understanding this problem, this basic problem of existence. And it is a challenge. And so how do we actually start the process of addressing this issue? And I think the last 2 years, it's hard to say whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think there's many aspects of the last 2 years have been quite interesting, I think, within the society. I think to some degree the way it's the Australian government, I'd say in particular, let's say, the Australian government, state and federal, have tried to look after the community financially and in health actions and all that. It's easy to be critical, but I think that in general it's been tough for a lot of people, but I think there's many things to sort of respect in what has happened in the last 2 years. Okay, so it's not necessarily over, but look, there's actually not a lot of point talking about COVID because it's just another external circumstance. I'm sure that people in the Ukraine are not particularly worried about COVID at the moment, and there's people all over the world who were never worried about COVID because their own problems were far greater. But I do think as a society it's been a very interesting 2 years, and historically plagues and viruses and things like this have caused great transformation in societies. The history of it is very, very interesting. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. So here we're talking about my internal experience of unsatisfactoriness and what do I do about it. That's the key issue for any of us, is that we can talk about, like using Shantideva's example, we can talk about the rough stones here or there or the thorns that are here or there or whatever, but the problem is me standing on them. And that is what I can protect myself from. So I can protect myself from all of the issues of the world by somehow tackling my own personal experience. And so, let's say merely in terms of agitation, being agitated. So we experience something externally, and as a consequence of the way I'm looking at that circumstance and my emotional reaction, as a consequence, I'm feeling agitated. So the thing that I'm actually suffering from is the agitation. You know, the actual thing that I'm suffering from in my experience is the agitation. It's not necessarily the external circumstance. To see that difference is that the thing that I actually suffer from is my personal agitation. And my personal agitation I have linked to some external experience. But what actually is causing me the suffering is my agitation. So I think that's a really important thing to understand, is that when your enemy walks into the room, it's not the fact that your enemy has walked into the room that disturbs you. The thing that is disturbing you is the disturbance itself in your mind by holding that apprehension or that thought of your enemy coming into your room and recollecting why you think they're an enemy. So that whole process of the picture that you build up is the enemy. Your enemy walks into the room. You recognize, you allow your agitation to respond or to rise up. You recollect all of the misdeeds that this enemy has done to you, and you dwell on them, and you maybe not exaggerate, but you exacerbate your response to it. You reinvigorate your anger by holding the enemy as your thought, as your object in your mind. So to understand that process, and because of that, I experience this agitation and suffering. So the solutions then become clear. You can not recognize the enemy, not apprehend the enemy. You can not recollect all the previous misdeeds and the injustices that you've suffered. You can then not apprehend them as unsatisfactory or as harmful. You know, we're actually apprehending them as harmful to me. And because of all of those different ingredients, I then feel hurt, agitated, angry, and my personal experience is disturbed. So there's various factors there of my mental engagement with that circumstance. And so here the pathway for us is, if we recognise that there's a mental engagement with some circumstance that is causing me suffering, then to learn to recognise that the solution for me is to not engage mentally, not engage with that thought. For me, this is an important practice, that to recognise the disturbance that's coming from a particular thought, and then trying to make the determination to not engage in that thought. Okay. So this requires us to actually be aware of this process of me seeing a person, an enemy, or some unpleasant circumstance, and then the issue is not that person or not that circumstance, but the fact that I am engaging mentally in that process. So that's, to me, that is the absolute secret about trying to remove my agitation, is somehow trying to develop the mental power to be able to by choice, not engage in that problem. By my own decision process to not engage in that apprehension of the enemy, the embellishment of the history, or the justification, the self-righteous sort of justification as to why I'm angry and how justified it is. These are all tricks of our mind to cause us to engage in that situation. So, and you can see that if mentally I do not engage, then I do not have the experience of engaging with the enemy mentally.
So what do you substitute your mind with?
So the question then is, what can we substitute our mind with? And we can talk about that in meditation, but the first thing is to understand this process, and then we say, what is the solution? So the solution is to understand this mental practice, and then to understand the diversionary. We can start off with diversionary tactics. And so a diversionary tactic would be to focus on your breath. And we recognise that it's a diversionary tactic, right? Then we can look at the transformative tactics. So the transformative tactics then involve looking at what's the cause of this circumstance, and the causes can be my previous actions. That's one aspect. And so that somebody who's harming you, if you make the acceptance that the reason I am being harmed is because of my previous actions, and so by that harm occurring now, it is exhausting that previous cause. That's a transformative approach. And then the next thing is to understand that your own habituation to responding with anger to circumstances is also a sort of a karmic result. And so that recognition of your own natural tendencies, that it gives you a repeating pattern of anger and of suffering due to anger and of engaging with enemies and having that whole circumstance of repeating problems in life of this type. So the transformative sort of actions that we can engage in is understanding this cause and effect situation, understanding the undesirability of that mental state that we have habitually cultivated, and that it is natively undesirable. And so I think if you can really convince yourself that, say for instance, you look inside and you see that the mind of anger is by its own nature disturbing to you, if you really accept that it is so unattractive a mental state to have, and you fully accept that my wish is to be happy, I believe you don't need any other motivation to then eliminate anger from your experience. If you really accept that the meaning of life is for you to be happy, the meaning of life is to be happy and to be free from suffering. If you fully accept that statement, then you would make every effort to not be angry, because you would recognise that anger by itself is an unpleasant experience, irrespective of the righteousness of your anger. So I think there's more actually, but let's say we talk about two main things is the diversionary thing. Look at the carpet. Find all the funny shapes in the carpet. Focus on the breath. Think of the Buddha. Think of Shantideva. Think of something else, anything else. Anything. Divert your mind from that thought. So the diversionary tactics that's one whole collection of activity, but then I think ultimately we need to understand the transformative and ultimately then the application of wisdom to understand where it comes from, why it's like that, and how to eliminate it. But for us, I think the diversionary is a good starting point. So, and a big part of that then is meditating. So with meditation, one of the things about meditation, even like simple what we're going to do, focusing on the breath, that the more we develop that ability to focus on the breath, the more that we can become self-aware. So this quality of mindfulness, these qualities of mindfulness and introspection, the ability to be self-aware, grows by the process of meditation. So the aim of our meditation is to develop these qualities of mindfulness and alertness, or mindfulness and introspection. And so then we then use that mindfulness to identify what's happening within my experience. And the more we can identify what's happening within my experience, the more we can then apply an antidote or a diversionary tactic or some other method. Even if that method is to walk out of the room and go somewhere else and go and do something else. But you recognise the challenge that you're facing and you deal with it as best you can. But that requires this awareness, self-awareness. So we'll do some meditation. Is there anybody here for except for the last 2 years, anybody here for the very first time? Yeah, a few of you. Okay, great. All right, so thanks for coming. So meditation is just called concentration meditation. And we focus on the breath coming in, going out, coming in, going out, your awareness of the breath coming in and going out. So to start the meditation, just become aware of where your mind is. Where is your mind? And bring your mind, whatever the mind is, bring it within yourself. So bring your mind within your body, your concentration, your awareness inside your body, and then let all of the thoughts in your mind fall away, and keep doing that for, until you sort of have no mental chatter going on. And bring your mind down to where it's free of any thought. Try to bring your mind to a state free of any thought. Then turn your attention to the breath. Coming in, going out. Breath coming in, going out, like that. So let's do this for a few minutes and focus 100% on the breath, just coming in, going out. If you become distracted, bring your mind straight back onto the breath. So as soon as you are aware that you're distracted, just bring your concentration back onto the breath. So you can relax your concentration a little bit and just review your meditation. Just have a look what happened in your meditation. If you were daydreaming or sleeping or distracted, that helps you understand how distracted the mind is. So we just repeat the meditation exactly the same, with a strong determination to keep your concentration just on the breath. So we can relax again our concentration. So we have had this bit of a discussion about anger and resentment and agitation. So a meditation that we can do. So I think if we approach it like this, if we think, I want to be happy. I want to be free from suffering. And, you can recollect and convince yourself that wanting to be happy and wanting to be free from suffering, free from problems, free from dissatisfaction, to really convince yourself that is a deep personal wish, an innate wish, something meaningful, to make my life meaningful, to be free from suffering, to have happiness, to be free from suffering. Some like really underlying innate wish, and that wish has motivated all of my actions in life. So that's something to examine, So this is, I'm not saying you should believe this, but to examine, is that correct? Is that true? To examine that. But I think it is, we can quite easily say, I want to be happy, I want to be free from suffering. I don't willingly want any suffering. I don't willingly give up any happiness. I want happiness. I want to be free from suffering. So then the discussion about anger and resentment and agitation, you may find that you can see within yourself that there is some, you might carry some anger, some resentment, agitation, maybe even hatred. You might be happy to use that word, of something or somebody, some sort of problem in your life, and so you carry that disturbance. And whenever you think about it, your mind goes back to that disturbance. You can see it, that there's something there. So we can do a meditation where we take that feeling and we breathe it out in the form of black smoke. So you imagine that disturbance inside of you comes out through your nostrils in the form of black smoke, and it goes down to the floor and dissipates completely. And then you visualize in front of you, above the figure of the Buddha, if you like, you can visualize the Buddha, and you imagine that coming from the Buddha is white light, and that white light, you can imagine you breathe it in, or you can imagine that it comes down through the crown of your head, but you can imagine you breathe it in, white light, and the white light comes in and completely fills your body, right down to your fingertips, and the peace and love, contentment, openness is filled in your mind. So your mind becomes sort of open and clear. So you have this idea of breathing out your agitation, your disturbance, your anger, and then breathing in this idea of peace and contentment, or thinking that the blessing of the Buddha is enabling me to manifest peace and contentment and clarity. So from myself, I am developing my peace and contentment. So we can do this meditation just for a few minutes. So imagine, have a look, see any agitation or disturbance within yourself, and imagine you completely get rid of it. You breathe it out in the form of black smoke that completely leaves you. And then you breathe in this like white light that fills your body and fills your mind, enabling you to develop contentment and clarity and openness and peace, mental peace. So let's do this for a couple of minutes. So you just relax your concentration again. I think this is a good meditation to do at home. I like that meditation. And I'll just mention a meditation if you're, if you want to convince yourself of the disturbance that anger can bring you, is you can, if you feel courageous, I'll put it that way, you can sort of sit at home and actually recollect the circumstance or the person that makes you angry. You actually recollect and you dwell on that thought or that experience, but you observe your reaction, you observe your experience, observe the disturbance to your body and the disturbance to your mind. And the purpose of that is to convince yourself that anger is an unpleasant experience. You know, to actually really see the unpleasantness of anger within your own experience. So you know, to convince yourself that physical disturbance and the mental disturbance is not worth having. So, you know, there's plenty of medical evidence that you know, people that suffer from extensive anger, that their blood pressure, their physical comfort, the functioning of their body, you know, let alone the immediate effects of bright red skin and clenched teeth and, you know, tense muscles, but even the long-term effects of anger is really destructive to your health. So that's another reason. So so if you feel up to it, that, and you think, oh, I don't think that's true. I'm not sure about that. You can convince yourself or examine whether these things are true or not. You know. We've got time now for some questions, or some discussion. If anybody'd like to say anything, you're welcome. Yeah, okay. So the question is, in terms of the second noble truth, which is the truth of cause, and what's your name? What's your name? Catherine. Catherine's saying that, you know, her reading in that, people are talking about desire being the what that second noble truth is. So, and definitely desire is one of the things. So the two things are karma, which means action, and delusions. So desire is one of the major delusions. So desire, anger, and ignorance are the three primary delusions. Or not so much desire, sometimes the word attachment is used, but desirous attachment. So is your question then, how does desire function as a cause of unsatisfactoriness? Is that part of your question?
No, my own understanding was that desire is cause of suffering because the suffering, we experience the suffering because we have a desire as a natural condition. And the objects that we desire we get attached to, and it's unsatisfactory because, you know, it wears out, we get sick of it, as you were describing. And also the natural desire to have a mate is, or to have, you know, a nice partner is very much tied into attachment. And these are the more primitive reactions of anger as of attachment. So to me, that's why I always think of desire. The human condition.
Okay, so there's actually a few different reasons why desire is listed as the one of the causes of suffering. So one thing to consider about desire is that we think that, so desire is useful because out of desire I can accumulate something that makes me happy and content. But you can see that the mind of desire itself, so if we were able to have a moment of desire and then possess something and be content, that might be sort of okay. But the mind of contentment and the mind of desire are contradictory. So if we were able to have a moment of desire and then contentment, that might be sort of acceptable, but the trouble is we have a moment of desire, we achieve that, and then we have another moment of desire. And that it's unsatisfied, and so we have that unsatisfactoriness, that the mind of desire is not yet fulfilled. And so there's an unsatisfactoriness with the desire. In general, you can say there is an unsatisfactoriness with desire because the mind of desire, at the moment of the desire, it is unfulfilled. And if we then fulfill that previous moment of desire, the problem is that we have another moment of desire which is looking for something else, which is then unfulfilled. And so we have this constant trail of lack of fulfillment because the mind of desire is never satisfied. So that's one aspect of desire, why it's problematic. But the other one I find is also worth relating, and that is that this human body is, from the moment it's conceived or the moment that it's born, it's just destined for suffering. It's just, and each year that goes on, it's just more suffering, physical suffering. We're barreling along towards old age and death, or we're almost there. And, it's just this endless trail of problems with the body. Okay, so where does the body come from? So one of the aspects of desire and attachment, which I find quite interesting, is that the process of rebirth from a Buddhist point of view is that the previous consciousness or mind or something at the moment of conception feels desire to one or other of the parents or the process, and as a result of that moment of desire enters the conception, the mind. The mind enters the conception, and so the person's life is begun out of the force of desire. So I find that quite an extraordinary thing, that even this whole physical body and experience that we have is also the consequence of that process of rebirth, which for us is motivated by desire. Now, whether you accept that or not, is up to you, but I find it a very interesting sort of thought that this whole body, that whether you're male and female, is dependent on these sort of aspects of the mind of desire at the time of conception. Anyway, I find that interesting, but it's not necessarily something we need to talk about here. So, but to understand that the mind of desire, the mind of desire is something looking for satisfaction. And so if you're looking for satisfaction, that process is never finished and the satisfaction never arrives. Because the moment that you have achieved that moment of desire, if the mind of desire is still operating, it's again looking forward to a different satisfaction. And so as a result, it's never satisfied. So that's the aspect of the mind of desire, is that it is never satisfied. And that applies equally well to the person in poverty or the billionaire, that the mind of desire only produces unfulfilled, unreachable satisfaction, because it's never reached. Because the mind of desire is always seeking more. And that's why practicing the mind of contentment, is really important, because, the mind of contentment actually, in this moment, the mind of contentment is relatively happy. It's relatively happy. Look, if there's no more, I think we can sort of think about finishing up. So I hope I haven't been rambling around in odd directions tonight too much, but it's for me it's a great pleasure to be back talking again after 2 years, and so I'm really pleased about that, and let's hope it can continue without interruption. So we can think that we'll just do a finishing up meditation, we can think this is something really valuable for us to all come together and to think and to meditate together. So really something really valuable and precious. And imagine that we can imagine that takes the form of light or something that comes and dissolves into you. So that virtue of everybody coming together tonight dissolves into you, each person, the virtue of everybody dissolves into you, and just, something very valuable. And imagine that you, whatever that benefit is, imagine that you radiate that out to others, your family, your friends, the people you associate with. Imagine that benefit radiates out to everyone. And feel a great sense of contentment in even being able to think like this. Something really valuable. So thank you very much. We're not particularly having the tea and cake in the dining room, mainly because of COVID at the moment, but you are welcome to have a cup of tea there if you feel like it, but just stay safe is the important message. So, thank you all very much for coming. So.